Great. Hi, everyone. I have 101 on my computer, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon. My name is Wendy Alonzo, and I'm an assistant professor in the College of Nursing at the University of Nebraska Medical Center and the current chair of the CANS Early Career Special Interest Group. The Early Career Special Interest Group was initiated in 2018 by a small group of early career nurse scientists, and since then has grown to include over 70 early career members of CANS. The purpose of the Early Career Special Interest Group is to engage the early career members of CANS in activities to advance nursing science through developing leadership and scholarship. If you would like more information on how to join us in this special interest group, please visit our website at nursingscience.org/early career. When I'm done introducing our speaker for today, I will paste that website into the chat for you. Before we get started, I just wanted to note a few things. We will have a live question and answer session at the end of the presentation. Be aware that the microphones of all audience members have been muted. To submit questions, we ask that you click on the Q&A at the bottom of your screen and type your questions there. Please don't use the chat function for your questions. I want to thank you for joining us for today's webinar, and I'm delighted to introduce our speaker, Dr. Ansley Stanfill. Dr. Stanfill received a BS in neuroscience from Vanderbilt University in 2003. She worked as a research assistant in genetics and neuroimaging research before receiving her BSN in 2007 from St. Louis University. She has clinical experience in neurology and neurosurgery, endoscopy, and critical care. She received her PhD in 2014 from the University of Tennessee Health Science Center for her dissertation titled Dopaminergic Genetic Contributions to Obesity in Kidney Transplant Recipients. She was awarded an NIH/NINR F31 training grant for this project. Prior to assuming her faculty role, Dr. Stanfill also completed postdoctoral training in omics research at the University of Pittsburgh, supported by the NIH/NINR T32 Targeted Research and Academic Training of Nurses in Genomics. She is currently PI of a $1.1 million NIH/NINR R01 titled A Multivariate Predictive Model for Long-Term Disability Post-Subarachnoid Hemorrhage in Caucasian and African American Populations. In addition to her NIH research support, Dr. Stanfill has received grants from Sigma Theta Tau, the International Society of Nurses and Genetics, and the Southern Nursing Research Society. She has been published many times in basic science and nursing research journals and regularly presents her work at local, regional, national, and international conferences. Dr. Stanfill is currently an associate professor and the associate dean for research at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center College of Nursing. We are absolutely delighted to have Dr. Stanfill with us this afternoon to share her advice for early career nurse scientists on overcoming early career challenges and maintaining mental health during a pandemic. Welcome, Dr. Stanfill.
Thank you, Wendy. I'm really delighted to be here with you all today to discuss the challenges that are faced by early career nurse scientists. such as imposter syndrome, and offer you some insights addressing mental health issues and the symptoms that can be potentially worsened by the pandemic. And I'll get my slides to advance here. And so at the end of this lecture, my goal is that you would be able to describe some of these common challenges in early career academics. I know many of you are living these challenges right now, but I'm going to name them and describe the pitfalls and then provide you with some strategies that you can use to try to overcome each of these issues. I'm going to focus in particular on imposter syndrome. This is a really common phenomenon, but it's one that is not often talked about. And so I'm going to make myself a little bit vulnerable here, and I'm going to share my experience about this with this particular problem and talk further about how it can harm your career and what you got it. And then for those early career investigators that are listening in, we have a major historical event that's really impacting your career trajectories. And so I'm going to talk about how the pandemic can make some early career challenges even more formidable. And then I'll be identifying some strategies to maintain mental health during that pandemic. I believe we will have some time for questions at the end. So I'm hoping some of you may share some of the strategies that you have as well. And so I didn't pick this particular picture. It was actually added by Rachel James, but I really love it. She picked a good one. And one of the reasons that I love my role as Associate Dean of Research is that I get to help faculty see how to put these puzzle pieces together. I really enjoy building that kind of career out and making those connections for people. And I like how in this picture, people are really helping each other. We don't do research in a bubble, and we don't successfully navigate the early career alone either. And so I hope that one of the ideas you're going to take away from this lecture is that you are not alone. Knowing that others go through a similar process can be comforting. So I want you to keep in touch with your friends and your senior experts to ask for advice and share your experiences. In this next part of the lecture, I'm going to go through 5 different stages of the early career and then describe the solutions that I found to be helpful in my life for each of these areas. The first is about work-life balance. This is more than just a buzzword. We hear it all the time, but it is really an important thing to try to achieve for your mental health and the longevity of your career. The next challenge is that of juggling multiple responsibilities. And as your career grows, it does become even more of an issue as you start to add more and more balls to your little stress act. I'm going to let you know some ways in which I determine how to prioritize these responsibilities with a mind to that work-life balance. And I'm also going to discuss how to make your best target of getting the most bang for your buck, identifying the right opportunities for you. Then I'm going to discuss the idea of finding the right mentorship. And as you grow in your career, not only how to be a good mentee, but also a good mentor. And then, as I mentioned before, I'm going to give some special attention to imposter syndrome. This is a phenomenon that's not often discussed, but it can really impact your mental health at this stage of your career. And so this first part is about that work-life balance. And I can promise you, even though I'm the one hosting this webinar, I don't have this totally figured out. It's really tricky in academia. We love what we do. We're all high achievers, and then things just all sort of bleed together. But we know that saying, all work and no play makes Jack and Jill very dull, right? And so in this age, we have things more difficult than our predecessors did. By having smartphones and remote working technology, it means that even when we're out on a holiday, it's really hard to switch off and to generally rest and recharge. And the complaint is that we are expected to be on call at all times without being allowed to really have outside of work or away from work. And so I've definitely felt that in my career, and a lot of times you get rewarded for that behavior. But over time, this is detrimental to our productivity, our mental health, and generally our sanity overall. And so many of you will be pretty familiar with, say, stress adaptation model. It's a pretty common theory that's cited in nursing theory classes. And it really discusses how when we are exposed to stress, we respond by going into an initial alarm phase. And this alarm response that physiologically makes us able to undergo fight or flight. But when the stress doesn't go away, our body's ability to resist suffers, which leads to exhaustion of the compensatory mechanisms, and we get a lot of secondary health-related problems because of that sustained stress. And so a lot of times during the early career, we can discuss having the concept of good time management skills. And so sometimes this can be really confusing what it actually looks like. We do know what it's not. We know people who don't have good time management skills. They miss deadlines. They're constantly working late or getting there really early in order to try to keep up. And so we're going to talk a little bit later about the problem of being overcommitted and deciding which tasks to say yes to. But here, let's assume that in this time management scenario, the amount of work is actually reasonable. And so if that is true, time management can still be quite challenging. Self-discipline is really essential to being a successful academic, not only in setting your own timetables, but then also managing that family and work time too. And so one way that you start to really improve your time management skills is by knowing how to budget your time effectively. And many of you guys have probably experienced something that really blindsided me a little bit when I first started on this career path. I would sit down and I would estimate that a particular task was going to say take me an hour. And I found a lot of times I was off by like orders of magnitude. And so my rule of thumb is that whatever my initial estimate is, I go ahead and multiply that out by 3. And I try to set aside that amount of time. I know that seems that I'm being a little bit generous here, but I would rather personally to under promise and over deliver than have the other way around when I'm budgeting my time out. And so over time, you do find that you get better at these estimates and you find that your system tends to work a bit better. And so once you have that more realistic budget for your time, you can start to be able to prioritize. One of the things that bothered me a little bit when I shifted from clinical practice into academia is that my job never really felt done. It doesn't feel done in the clinical arena either, but I was clocking out, I was giving my responsibility over to somebody else that then could carry on and carry forward. But here in academia, you are never, ever going to run out of things to do. And so that means that you have to prioritize. There's only so much of you to go around. And so you have to decide what are the things that have to be done today? What are the things that can wait until tomorrow? What do you need to get done in the week or maybe sometime soonish? And so I'm a total list maker. I have lists for what I need to do for every day. I have a running list of deadlines that I have to meet in the coming month. And then I have a general to-do list that I keep track of the status of all my projects, what's in so-and-so's hands, what things do I need to follow up on at what time. And this system may not work for you. And I actually debated on showing my own to-do list, and I thought I might overwhelm people. They're pretty messy and pretty scary. So I found this nice stylized photo that looked a little bit neater than my actual system. But whatever system works for you, pick it up and run with that because it allows you to really then start to sort out those things that are the most important, and they rise to the top before that critical deadline is missed. And so when you're planning out your day, think a little bit about the cost of shifting gears between tasks. So that can mean the shifting gears between different tasks at work. Like I try as much as I can to block all of my meetings together. That doesn't really always work, but I do try as much as I can. And that gives me a bit more time in my day because I'm not spending time shifting between collaborative work and then getting back immersed into whatever my writing project is at the moment, trying to shift back into that collaborative one. And so I find that particularly with writing, which is super important for academia, grant writing or working on a paper work presentation, I find that it's really hard for me to get back into writing mode once I've left it. And so I know that I write that way. I know that a lot of people out there have suggested that you block off 15 minutes to write. That strategy may work great for you, and I'm so happy if it does. It just doesn't work for me. What works better for me is that I block out swaths of time. So I need like a 2 or 3 hour block on my calendar. I schedule it just like any other meeting, and just like any other meeting that I go to, I do not answer my text messages. I turn off my email. I don't answer the phone. And I'm not doing kind of half work. I'm really focused on the task that's at hand. I can get immersed into my writing, and then whatever I'm doing gets my best effort. There's quite a bit of literature out there that talks about the cost of multitasking, that basically you're not doing either job very well. Our brains just aren't wired very well to be able to multitask efficiently. You feel like you're being efficiently, but if either of the two tasks, you have to redo them. If you find a bunch of mistakes in what you've already done, you're paying a pretty big price and to achieve that multitasking. And so that's what works really well for me. It's kind of being mindful in whatever task you're doing at that time. And so in academia, of course, we do get rewarded sometimes for multitasking and for not having an ideal work-life balance. But we really need to consider the long-term cost of that behavior. I know for sure that when work starts to get really hectic, my relationships with my friends and family really suffer. I get tired, I'm short-tempered. The stress overall can really take a toll on my physical and my mental health. And this balance may wind up looking different at different points in your career, at different times of the semester. And it can vary by generational perspective and the life stage that you're in. And so I found this really interesting article when I was doing some background research for this. It's in Forbes, short article, but it talks a little bit about the differences between baby boomers, Gen Xers, and millennials on what value when they're considering their work-life balance and what that may look like to different people at different life stages. And so don't worry, I presented a little bit of gloom and doom about how work-life balance is so hard, but I do have a couple of suggestions that have worked for me. When I was feeling overwhelmed by this issue, when I kind of got to the next stage and took on my administrative role, I got totally overwhelmed for a little bit. And I found that keeping a log was really helpful because I then started to see a little bit better how much time I was spending on different tasks and where I was losing time. And so one of the things that I was a little bit surprised to find was how much time I was spending perusing social media. And so while it's definitely okay to feel connected with your distant friends and family, this doesn't fill you up from a social connection perspective, and at least it didn't for me. I found that for me, I was better off scheduling now what would be a socially distanced patio coffee session rather than scrolling through a bunch of random thoughts and really what amounts to the highlight reel of acquaintances' lives. And so to decide how I was going to be spending my time, I then started to visualize like what a realistic but ideal picture of an average week would look like for me. And I started to establish some boundaries about how I could protect that deal, but still accommodate the needs of my role within the university. And for me, that meant that I had to limit the amount of work that I do weekends. I definitely can't stop it entirely. It's just the nature of the beast for me right now. But I did find that I could limit it to only one work day on the weekend. And then I could have the other day sort of off. And maybe I only check my email once during the day, just make sure there's no fires in there and move right along. And some of you may be able to move those boundaries differently. Maybe the weekend work is the time you're most productive. It just depends on you and the expectations of your particular university, your career stage, and your mentor. And then another thing that I felt like really helped me was to automate as much as I could. I always like that KISS method, keep it simple, stupid. And so sometimes the simplest solutions can really save you time. I do tend to be a very late adopter of technology. I'm terrible. I buck technology. I hate getting up to the 21st century. And my lab manager was like, Ansley, you really gotta get with the program here. And so up until fairly recently, like probably the past year or so, I kept everything on paper. All of my notes on meetings, my to-do list, everything was paper. And I was carrying around all these different files. It was hurting my shoulder. I was carrying around so many files. And then without fail, I would be in one meeting and have my folder for that meeting. And then I'd think of something that I needed to tell somebody else in a different meeting. And I'd write it on a Post-it note. And then the Post-it note would disappear. And then it was just terrible. And so I actually realized that by keeping that log, I was spending a good bit of time hunting around for the right piece of paper. And so my lab manager suggested to start using Microsoft OneNote. And so I got a 2-in-1 computer tablet. I have OneNote synced across my devices. And so I can be in that meeting. I pop over to the other meeting that I need to do the thing in, write it down real quick and pop back, but everything's all there in one page. I can drop in PDF files, whatever. So whatever the system works for you, maybe the file folders are working great for you guys. But I found that that was something that then took the stress of searching around for the right file out of my life and really kind of helped me. And so let's talk a little bit about the idea of seasons. An idea that I've stolen, if you guys have ever listened to Dave Ramsey, the financial planner, there is a radio personality that also works with him that talks about Christy Wright. She's a business boutique. She really specializes in helping women to realize their dreams of entrepreneurship. And she talks about building in the idea of seasons, that maybe right now in your career, this is a time you get your first grant out the door and you know that it is going to stink and you are going to have pretty bad work-life balance, but it's for a season. You're going to get the grant out the door, you're going to get that done, and they're going to be able to spend a little bit more quality time. And so it's like thinking about it instead of that this is the way my life is going to be forever. It's thinking about, I've got this big project. This is my first time doing a really large grant. I'm going to take this time. Things are going to be a little bit tough, but then we're going to get through it. And then the next time is going to be easier. And so think about, as you're trying to achieve this work-life balance, that's going to look different at different seasons of not only your life itself, but also at different seasons of your career. And so one of the things that I want to give you all permission to do is to realize that you're not a superhero. We all want to be everything to everybody and be, you know, this really high achiever. And that's great. I'm so pro having really high standards and high goals, but you can't do it all at the exact same time. And so maybe, you know, now is not the time to start your marathon career while you're in your doctoral program. Maybe the marathons are going to have to wait until a little bit later in life. Or maybe, you know, if you're a new mom, maybe now isn't the time to write your first really big NIH grant. Maybe, you know, getting some paper out the door is a more realistic goal. And so think about how you can kind of make that happen from a work-life balance and kind of strategize a little bit so that you feel like you aren't necessarily putting all of your dreams on hold. You're just not necessarily doing them all at the same time. And so moving on to the next potential early career challenge is that of juggling multiple responsibilities. And so when you become an assistant professor, most universities require you to have effort in either 3 or 4 areas. And that's in research and scholarship and education, in service to both your university and to your profession, and then in clinical practice. At my university, that's if you're a nurse practitioner. But you have to balance across those different areas. And so one of the things that you have to learn as you're moving from your doctoral program or your postdoctoral appointment into your assistant professorship is really kind of learning how to juggle all of these different categories and how to achieve your goals in all areas at the same time. And so again, I'm going to steal again from that same radio personality that works with Dave Ramsey. I'm not wanting to be a business entrepreneur, but she has a lot of great life advice too. And so one of the things that she talks about is glass balls versus plastic balls. And so as you're juggling, what are the things that you know that if you drop, they're going to shatter? And what are the things that if you drop are going to bounce a little bit? And then I also wanted to think about the idea of rocks, and let's think more like boulders that we're juggling around, the things that we know that we can't change, the things that have to be the way that they are. And so you can't decide, I can't tell you which ones are glassic for each one of you, but you have to think about what are the things that are really, truly the high priority for me. The things that maybe on your last evaluation, your student evaluations weren't really what you'd hoped that they were going to be. Well, that may put educational service in a more glass ball position than it would be for somebody who had always gotten really excellent student evaluations. Maybe if you know that you have to achieve a certain funding rate in order to keep your tenure track position, that's going to be more of a glass ball for you than maybe for somebody who hadn't been in that position. And so I know that we would all love to have more time in the day. That's what we always say. I think that's probably, if I could have one thing in life, having more hours in the day would be what I'd ask for. But ultimately, you will make time for what is important to you. And so you have to think about the things that you will always make time for. You think about that phone call from a family member. If your family is a super high priority, you're going to drop what you're doing and you're going to answer it and you're going to help them out in whatever way they need. If your research career, if you're really struggling to get funding, you're going to make time to do that grant writing. So you think about it that way, and then see what you can also sort of take away or let fall to another season. And so one of the things, I was talking to Wendy before the webinar started a little bit. I am an avid equestrian. I horseback ride, I compete all over the country. And it's something that I really, really love to do. It's very important to me, but obviously my career is even more important. And so one of the things that I've had to give myself permission to do is to realize that even if I only get a 10-minute ride in that day, normally I would ride for 45 minutes or an hour. Even if I only get a 10-minute ride, or even if I just go down and, walk around for a little bit, I'm still lapping everybody that's down there on the couch. And so if that's all that I can manage on that day, that's okay. And so, sometimes you just have to push it into that other season. And the other thing that you can potentially think about doing is delaying. And I'm going to put the caveat here that you're going to delay it to a point. So let's say that you know that this particular opportunity, you've got a great grant that's a really, really good fit for you. Maybe there might be a way that you could say, well, I'm not going to go for that this cycle, but for next cycle, I'm going to go for it because I've got these other responsibilities that are really glass at this time, but I definitely want to pick up that grant a little bit later on. So you almost kind of have to have a little bit of a negotiation with yourself on these different responsibilities. And there's really two traps that we need to avoid as we're thinking about how to juggle these responsibilities. And that first is to avoid the trap of perfectionism. We all want to do a really good job, but sometimes does everything need to be totally perfect? There's sometimes that we get handed tasks that can be good. They just don't necessarily need to be totally top-notch. Like if you're tasked with creating an agenda for a meeting, you want to be thorough, you want to think about it, you want to give some thoughtful consideration, but it doesn't need to be in the perfect font with the beautiful headings and all that. You're still going to get your point across. And so if we can limit the time that's spent on that task that really doesn't have to be totally perfect, that gives you freed up time to do something else, and something where the stakes are maybe a little bit higher. And so with that in mind, we also need to have an idea of keeping up with the Joneses. That's all great if Susie Q, Bobby T, whoever he is out there and doing all and being all and killing it. Awesome. But I guarantee you, and I don't care who you are, you've got some achievements out there or circumstances that Susie and Bobby don't. So trying to keep up with others and to be the best at everything is really a surefire path to being unhappy, and that unhappiness can often sabotage the success that you do achieve. And so when you're comparing yourself to others, it's going to be a losing battle because there's always going to be somebody out there that is doing something that you would like to do or something that you would like to see, and it's going to make you fall short over and over again. And then finally, I'm going to state a little bit of an unpopular opinion, but I do think it's true. We love what we do. We wouldn't have slogged through all of the schooling, all that debt, jumped through all these hoops. If we didn't love this, we wouldn't be doing it. But that commitment and that passion can be a double-edged sword. And so it can lend ourselves to pushing ourselves really hard. And for many talented early career investigators, it can really contribute to some sense of burnout. And so we have to remember that this is a marathon. This is not a sprint. You've got your whole career ahead of you. We can't do all and be all the time. And so remember what it was that you came to this career to do. And by all means, I want you to do that. I want you to achieve that goal. But don't allow it to lose a piece of what makes you in that process. It's okay to have a moment where you take your foot off the gas and think about what that value is that you're going to leave behind in your career, but give yourself permission to not have to do it all right this second. And so usually early career individuals really should say yes to the majority of opportunities that are presented to them. I know a lot of you probably heard that from your mentors. The reasoning behind that is that even though the opportunity that you're presented with does not directly relate to your program of research or your planned career, you're still going to be able to use it for networking or for building a skill set that will be helpful later on in your life. So when I was early career, very early career, I had a great opportunity that was set in front of me to work on a manuscript that was on the genomics and metabolic syndrome. I really didn't know anything about that much at the time, but I got to learn from two senior scientists that were on the project. And then I also got a great opportunity to participate as a panelist on a webinar on the project, which you could say helped me learn how to do things like this webinar today. So the path to your ultimate program of research is really not going to be linear. You don't know exactly where you're going to wind all the time. There are these little blind alleys, these little sideways moves. And so sometimes it can be a little bit confusing about what the next step should be. And so try to keep focused on your immediate work, but also keep in mind how it may evolve in the future. And so usually you're going to say yes, but as you move through your early career period, there's a point where you can't take anymore. And so I've developed this idea on a grid of what you should say yes and what you could consider saying no to. And I think about the dimensions of that grid are things that are really fun to do. And there should have been, I'm sorry, it somehow slipped off the slide. The top part of the middle arrow should say super fun. And then the bottom of the arrow should say not so fun. And then the other dimension is things that are great for your career and then things that are not so beneficial for your career. So the things that are super fun and great for your, those are like really easy yeses. These are things that are going to move you forward. You're going to learn a lot. You're going to enjoy doing them. That's great. And then the things that are easy no's, the things that are not very fun and not really going to contribute a whole lot to your career, those are pretty easy no's too. You got too much on your plate right now. But the gray area are those question marks there. And so how do you decide when to take up on those opportunities? And so I consider three different factors when I'm trying to decide those things that are super fun, but not really all that beneficial for my career. And then those things that are great for your career, but really not fun at all. And so I think about the first thing as timing the opportunity. Can I really fit this in with my other commitments, or am I going to place myself at risk for not meeting other deadlines? I take into account not only my other work deadlines, but also the personal commitments that I may have. Almost, you know, my nephew, I go to my nephew's basketball game and this is due on Friday, and there's just no way that I can get it done, then I may need to negotiate about that. I might not be able to make the deadline and still keep a glass ball from breaking in my own life. The next thing that I think about is the amount of effort that's required. Something that is for your career, not so fun to do, but only takes maybe 15 or 20 minutes. Go ahead and get it done. But if it's something that is not so beneficial for your career, but fun, but really going to take a massive chunk of your time in order to be able to accomplish, the missed cost and the missed opportunity of not being able to say yes to other things maybe much. And so we also have to consider what the cost of no to that particular opportunity is. How are you going to affect your other personal networks, and how are you going to change your ability to answer for future opportunities? And then the next thing that I wanted to talk about that's a big challenge of early career, and this one comes up in almost every topic, every time we talk about early career issues, is that of mentorship. Where do you look for mentors? And I will say that, obviously through your university, you'll have your mentors in your doctoral program. They'll be assigned. You'll have your committee members that can act as mentors too. But those informal mentors and those peer mentors are also really important. Think about how some of those informal mentors, the people that you bump into back when we were able to be face-to-face for conferences, sometimes the people that you bump into at the coffee line turn out to be some of the greatest and most influential mentors in your entire life, just because you happen to be getting a cup of coffee together. All of a sudden you launch into a conversation and it turns out that this person really has some advice for your career. So it's hard to say how to really find the best mentor, because sometimes it can be accidental, just being in the right place at the right time. And so I would say that, keeping your eyes open and keeping your preconceived notions of what a mentor might or might not look like can really help you in this area. And I get a lot that what if my university is small, it's not research intensive, there's nobody that's, really tied to my program of research. And in this case, unfortunately, you got to be creative. So, one of the silver linings of the pandemic is that we all have learned how well remote technology can really work. And so, this is a great opportunity that you are in a particular area and this is what you really want to research and this is what you devote your whole career to. But because of personal circumstances, you can't leave your university, you can't go to the school. Reach out to mentors that could be at another school and say, this is what I'm wanting to do. I would love to establish, a little bit of a relationship with you. I'd love to chat with you. Could we set up a Zoom meeting to talk about your super pivotal paper? One of the things that I always thought was kind of funny when I was in early career, people would say, oh, just go up to the most senior scientist and introduce yourself. And I'm like, oh no, this is gonna be terrible. And people are flattered when you like their work. And you got to remember that super senior scientist has devoted their entire career to that thing that you're also interested in. And so it's like an insta bond. So, be humble, be willing to, work around their schedule. But definitely don't be afraid of approaching somebody and talking to them about their research. And so one of the things about having a successful mentee and mentor relationship is that this really is a two-way street. And you start to realize that as you move through your early career period, starting towards the mid-career, how much you learn from your mentees as well as you learn from your mentors. It really is a two-way street. As a mentee, you definitely want to respect your mentor's time. These are typically going to be pretty busy people, and realize that your mentor isn't limitless. They do have, other constraints on their time. They do have other things that they need to learn about as well. They're not perfect. No one mentor is going to give you everything you need to know about everything. Realize that feedback is a gift. Even if it's not necessarily feedback that you can take into account at that point, somebody has given their time and their energy to helping you along their career. And so a little bit of gratefulness can go a long way, both on the behalf of being a mentee and then also being a mentor, that somebody is looking to you for advice. And so now I'm going to talk about that ugly imposter syndrome. And so in order to recognize that this could be a problem, we need to talk a little bit about what it is. This is a persistent inadequacy that can continue despite your evident success. And so essentially people with imposter syndrome have feelings of this inadequacy and self-doubt. They feel like they may be exposed as a fraud. And that they do not deserve whatever they've achieved. They attribute their success to luck. They've duped other people into believing that they're more intelligent or more capable than they actually are. And what really is happening here is that people fail to internalize their accomplishments, however successful they are in their field. And so this does not equate with low self-esteem or lack of self-confidence. And it's been linked pretty closely with perfectionism in women and among academics. And so citations say that about 70 experiences in their career, but I would argue that basically every high achieving person you know has had these feelings at some point. It's really pretty normal to go through this at some time or another. And so these are the common symptoms. It's this idea of being discovered as a fraud. And academia really provides lots of opportunities for imposter syndrome to rise up. We give presentations, we give publications, we're all competing for awards, we're lecturing to students. We get this cycle that can be of self-doubt and inadequacy. And so I really liked this quote, we're all learning out there. Even the most senior scientists among us still learn something new every day. And when you don't know something, it's okay. It doesn't mean you're a fraud. It makes you a student. I really like this quote. And remember that if we knew what we were doing, it wouldn't be impactful research. We're supposed to not know the answers to everything. It wouldn't be worth it to research something that we already knew everything about. And so one of the common thoughts of people with imposter syndrome is really that their success is no big deal. They do have this feeling of failure, like they're never going to live up to their previous success. And that they've really just been kind of faking it along, that their achievements thus far have just been luck, or they feel like somebody actually made a mistake giving them this promotion or this particular accolade. And so this often masks the fear that they won't be able to succeed the next time. And so in her book, and Valerie Young is really the expert on imposter syndrome, but she describes 5 types. The first is the perfectionist. These are people who are never satisfied. Their work could always be better. And they get a lot of self-pressure and high amounts of anxiety because they think they always could be just a little bit better. The superhero, these people feel a little bit inadequate, and so they just push themselves. They don't have that work-life balance. They work as hard as they possibly can because they're afraid that they're inadequate. The experts are always trying to learn more, and they're never really satisfied with whatever level of understanding they have. While the natural geniuses set these really lofty goals from themselves, and then they're absolutely crushed when they don't get it on their first try. And then finally, the soloist feels like if they have to ask for help for anybody, anything, that they are revealing weakness or incompetence. And so these are some pretty high achieving women here, and all of them have spoken out about their feelings of inadequacy. Maya Angelou once said that she's written 11 books, but each time that she published one, she said, they're going to find me out now. I've run a game on everybody and they're going to find me out. She really suffered pretty strongly from imposter syndrome. And so it's really important to identify this because it can harm your career. It really prevents you from reaching out for those opportunities that you would like to have. You can't celebrate your success. It's just this vicious cycle that creates anxiety, and long-term is really going to harm your health. And so in the next section of the talk, I'm going to discuss a little bit about what you can do about it. And the first thing you can do is really to reframe your thoughts. If you find yourself in a situation that's outside your comfort zone and you have those feelings of doubt, don't focus on the potential for failure. Think about what kind of new perspective you can bring to the situation that others don't have. And realize that every time you push against that comfort zone, you're going to be learning and growing. Even if you fail, there's something to be learned from those failures that'll make you better and stronger on your next go round. And really sharing your feelings with your trusted friends and mentors I absolutely guarantee you talk to your mentor and see if they've ever felt this before. It's part of growth. You kind of have to go through this. If you're a high achiever, you have to go through the sense that sometimes you don't know what you're doing. And then most importantly, be kind to yourself. Sometimes when you're thinking some particularly negative internal thoughts, it can help to turn them around and think about if somebody were talking about your best friend that way. You wouldn't let anybody sit there and talk to you about your best friend like that. So be as kind to yourself as you would encourage people to be to others. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about my own experience with imposter syndrome and what helped me in controlling, though I will say can't always eliminate these feelings. And so I did a little bit of clicking around the internet when I was looking for some good pictures for imposter syndrome. And I found this great website called rockyourresearch.com. They have really interesting and helpful early career podcasts. So I encourage each of you to listen to some of those in your spare time. And so it's, to some extent, it can feel like this little cartoon here that I stole off their website. It can feel like this, that you get the award or fellowship or publication, whatever it is, and you're overjoyed. But then as soon as the celebration is done, you're like, oh no, what if I'm not good enough? What if I can't do this? What if I can't achieve? And so for me, what really helped me was to hone my expertise, to really keep practicing my craft. I felt like more knowledge would help me adjust a little bit from that self-doubt. And I really wasn't always quite sure how to transition from the left-hand side of the imposter syndrome diagram over to that right-hand side. I had to think about what I needed to be an expert in. It's not realistic to be an expert in everything that you could possibly ever need to know, but I could carve off some of the different pieces and put my spin and my own unique ideas on that overlap. And that's really what starts to define an expert. They have the experience and the knowledge to understand where those little overlaps occur. So for instance, I knew very early on, that I would always have a program of research in the genomics of recovery after stroke. It's really blended my clinical experience, and it was a problem that I was really passionate about, and what I wanted to leave on the world with. Really improving outcomes and quality of life for stroke survivors. And so throughout my doctoral and postdoctoral work, and throughout my early career period, I knew that I needed to develop a skill set that had expertise in genomics, in neurology and neurosurgical patient care, and really specifically within subarachnoid hemorrhage. And then because of what I was seeing in the clinical population that I was working with, in health disparities and outcome. And so I found that I needed general skills in grant writing, presentation and nation, and some other areas. And so I did everything I could to develop this expertise and beat down those feelings of imposter syndrome. I read, I thought, I attended any lecture I could get my hands on. I designed and I conducted and I failed. And then I reframed many smaller studies. I presented them, I got feedback, and I used that feedback to then better design my next one with every time that I didn't get the result that I wanted. And so as I did this process over and over again, I found that each time that imposter syndrome voice in my head got a little bit smaller. And so every time I gave a presentation, I published a paper, I wrote a grant, I got an award, whatever it was, that little devil would show up and he'd say those awful things. But each time that I practiced, his voice started getting a little bit smaller. And then my confidence started to grow, and I did it again and again. And then finally my inner voice started to say that you've really got this. And so I laid out this slide really deliberately. I would be lying if I said that those thoughts never ever come up. But you see how those edges of those thoughts are getting blurred. And so they fade each time that I do this a little bit. And so at this point in the talk, I hope you realize that you guys are not alone. If you've ever felt any of these challenges, you are totally not alone. But for being in an early career period right now, you are probably experiencing some different challenges than perhaps your mentors experienced when you were at the same stage. And so I'm going to talk just a little bit about how the pandemic can make some early career challenges even more formidable. And so we've got this whole constant change. We've got constantly changing guidelines. We've got coursework that's in different formats. Our access to our resources has changed, not only from a research perspective, from a mentorship perspective, from even being able to go up to campus sometimes and get the paper file folder that you needed with the Post-it note on it, whatever it is. All of those things have changed. And then with work from home, in some ways that's helpful, but it also causes this constant blurring of the work-life personal boundaries. Your day seems to be expanded. There's not the cues of being able to put down your work. I've heard it called like laying down your sword at the end of the day and coming into your personal life. That boundary starts to become really blurred. And then for many people, you have these super increased personal obligations. And so your cup may be overflowing because you've got children at home that you're caring for. I hope that none of you have had the pain of experiencing somebody suffering from COVID in your own personal family circle. But you may be caring for those individuals. And so all of that can create a challenging situation of early career to really overflow and boil over. And so the third objective of the talk is then how to maintain mental health at a time when many of us are really experiencing some major challenges in this area. And so one of the first things that has worked for me is to have a routine. Even though work from home, nobody is looking for me to be sitting at my desk at 9 a.m. I still make sure that I do the routine in the same day. This is what my workday routine looks like. This is what my weekend routine looks like. Get dressed. I found like, while sweatpants are definitely comfortable and wonderful, wearing sweatpants every day was not good for my waistline, nor good for my workload and for the blurring of those work-life boundaries. One of the things that I've tried to do, because my workday is extended, I try to have a little bit of lunch away from the device. Even if it's only like a 15 minutes where I leave this desk in this situation and I leave my phone in here and I walk into the kitchen and I sit on the porch with my dogs for minutes, it can really help feeling a little bit more of a routine like that. It's really important to stay connected. One of the things that I've missed a lot during this pandemic are those little sidebar conversations happen like at the proverbial water cooler, but hallway or, in between before a meeting starts or something like that. So it's really important to stay connected to those individuals that are important to you. And then have healthful eating behaviors and stay active. Within my college, we've had some walking challenges. And those have been kind of fun because we can do a little trash talking on the app and say, oh, you're going down, I'm going to walk the dog now. You were in the leaderboard, but I'm going to get you. And it kind of makes you feel a little more engaged in your community. And then also has the side benefit of getting people away from their desk for a few minutes. I think it's really important to have realistic expectations for what you can do and making time for and committing to socially distanced, safe, non-work events. Go for a hike, do a home workout video, have a virtual game night, whatever it is. Committing to something that's beyond work can really be helpful. And then there's absolutely no shame in admitting that you may need some help. And so speaking to a professional may be something that could be very helpful for you. And so I'm going to close out with this last slide. This is a slide from the mental health series by Dr. Zers. She's on Twitter at ZJAYRES. She's a senior scientist in chemistry, and she's a really strong advocate for mental health in science. She has different posters like this that are available for free distribution. And so this is a pretty slide, so I'm going to give you guys time to look at it on your own. But she has some other slides about behavioral sciences for maintaining mental health during your doctoral program, during your postdoctoral program, during different career stages. And so I hope that this has been helpful to you guys, and I'm going to go ahead and leave this up while we start to take questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stanfill. This has been fantastic. We have about 7 minutes left for questions, and we do have a couple in the chat. So we'll start with those, and then actually I've been taking some notes. I have some questions too if we don't, if there's no one from the audience that has more questions. So the first question is, in your research, how do you approach not so responsive collaborators? How do you decide when to take on additional administrative roles? So that's actually 2 questions in one.
So first one was, I think you said non-responsive collaborators.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh boy, that's a challenge. And that's a question I get a lot from my junior faculty members. So one of the things that can be really challenging, and particularly at this career stage where you're kind of launching your own program of research, is you may be dependent on somebody else to give you something, to give you feedback, to give you access to data, access to samples, access to a patient population. And so sometimes people don't play well in the sandbox together. And sometimes personalities just don't work together for whatever reason. And so what I always try to do is think about when you are having somebody who's non-responsive. I try to schedule them, and of course it would be virtual right now. I try to schedule face-to-face with them and say, you know, are you overcommitted? Is there some other extenuating circumstance that's making you, you know, I've noticed that you haven't been responding to my emails as well. What can we do to make this relationship work? I'd really like to see this collaboration. I think it would be really beneficial for our patients or our families or whatever. That's what I generally try to do. But you also have to be not afraid to cut bait. Sometimes if you can find another way to get at the same source, you know, if there's another hospital in town that maybe you can get access to a similar population, or there's a publicly available data set that could help you away. Sometimes you unfortunately may need to cut bait. Not everybody plays well together, unfortunately. And then the second question was about administrative responsibilities. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so I can see you a little better. So administrative responsibilities are tricky because you have to really think about that decisional diagram that I had. You know, for me, I was a bit early in my career to consider an ADR position. And so I really had to think a lot about how that was going to affect my own lab, where I was in my funding trajectory on my own, what things I wanted to accomplish on my own in the next 5 years. And that I would know that cost analysis of getting my time elsewhere. And for me, this was something that I really wanted to do. It totally fit in with my career trajectory. And as crazy it is, I think it's super fun. So it was an easy yes for me at that point. But you know, administrative responsibilities are something that they can struggle with those boundary issues and that work-life balance. And so unfortunately, I don't know that there's exactly the right time to, it's kind of like having a baby. There's not really a good time to do it. You just kind of figure it out and how you can achieve that balance in a different way. And think about it also in seasons. Administrators typically, you know, they say deanship should be about 10 years. You know, when I'm thinking about different positions, you kind of think about your calendar out, you know, maybe you do this, you know, for 5 years or 10 years, and then you go on to do something else. So there's not an easy answer to that one either, unfortunately.
Thank you so much for that. I think we have time for one more. And just a kudos to you. There's been lots of really good feedback in the chat and also in the question Q&A that everyone finds this very helpful. The other last question would be that I have noticed in talks like this, there may be an assumption that early career scientists are young and healthy. Can you provide any insight for early career nurse scientists who are dealing with chronic illnesses or have experienced severe illness like COVID during this crucial time of maintaining productivity and balancing those with academic responsibilities?
Well, you guys are not throwing me easy, are you? So that's a really tough one because, you know, I think you really have to give yourself a little bit of grace and work with your university, your department chair, your ADR, about your mentor. What are realistic expectations? You know, we have some faculty that and some students in our doctoral program that are a bit less traditional. That have come from, you know, a different career path and then decided to come back into academia. And they oftentimes have either some health challenges or may have some life stage challenges, perhaps like caring for parents, those sorts of things. And so I really think you need to be realistic about what your goals are and work closely with your department chair, your ADR, your mentor about what are the best milestones to get you where you want to go in your career, but that are also achievable tasks.
Well, thank you so much. I think that you've given all of us a lot to think about. And on behalf of the Early Career Special Interest Group, I just want to thank you so much for doing this talk for us. And again, if any of the attendees are interested in learning more about the Early Career Special Interest Group, please visit the CANS website that was put in the chat earlier. And there have been some questions too as to whether or not this will be recorded and available. And the answer to that is yes, and it will be available on the website. So it's nursing-science.org/early career. Thanks everybody for attending, and look out for more webinars from the Early Career Special Interest Group. Thanks so much, Dr. Stanfill.
Thank you.